Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the CDCR Board of Directors and staff, I'd like to welcome you to this month's installment of the 17th Annual Reshaping Rochester Lecture Series. My name is Monika Reifenstein, and I am the Interim Executive Director here at the CDCR. As many of you probably know, this year's theme is the ideal city. Each year through our lecture series, the CDCR aims to open dialogue around urban planning, design strategies, and issues of equity that contribute to the revitalization of our region. We continue to be interested in how we can promote inclusion and equity through the way we think about and create space. Over the course of the series, we've been discussing what it means to be ideal, exploring cities that would be categorized as ideal, and asking if and how our own community could become ideal. The Community Design Center of Rochester was founded in 2003, and that means that we're celebrating nearly 2 decades of surveys in the greater Rochester region. At the Design Center, we promote the creation of vibrant, equitable, and resilient communities by engaging, educating, and empowering stakeholders in crafting purposeful design. I'd like to take this moment to introduce our board members, starting with the executive committee. We have Monika McCullough, our president, Bill Price, vice president, Stephanie Annunziata, our treasurer, and Vanessa Villeneuve, our secretary. Moving on to the at-large members, we have Howard Decker, Jean Dupre, Eugenio Marlin, Michael Pratico, newly elected Pamela Reese-Smith, welcome to Pamela,
we're very close to the
Miriam Jacob, and Tanya Zweilin. I thank you all for your commitment, guidance, and support. We'd like to recognize and thank the New York State Council on the Arts, who has made our work possible through their generous support for quite some time now. And we also appreciate the support of individuals in our community, including our circle of friends. This circle is made up of people and businesses who have donated $500 or more to our organization for operational support. A big thank you goes out to everyone on this list, and we extend an invitation to any of you who value the work of the Design Center to join our circle. We gratefully acknowledge the ESL Charitable Foundation for their sustaining generosity and support of the series at the gold level. And we'd also like to thank the RACF for their support as a silver level sponsor this year. At this time, I'd like to welcome Simeon Bannister, the Foundation's Executive Vice President, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Monika, and we're so glad to be with you today. At the Community Foundation, we recognize how critical it is for us to be thoughtful about the civic infrastructure that we have in place, and it's also the case that the Community Foundation has recently expanded our areas of interest, particularly our action area, under our vitality goal. That vitality goal, which includes arts and culture, historic preservation, and promoting successful aging, now includes advancing environmental justice and sustainability. We know how critical this goal area is for our community, and it's an opportunity for us to raise consciousness and bring people together. And we love the opportunity to do that with the Community Design Center of Rochester, where there's been so much focus on building sustainable community for the long term. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today and look forward to a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Simeon, and congratulations on your upcoming promotion to President and CEO at the RACF.
Thank you so much, Monika.
We're also lucky enough to have support from Labella Associates around this presentation and related events. Here to share a few words is Lucia Wu, the Environmental Renewables Manager at Labella.
Thanks, Monika, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for spending your valuable lunch hour with us. As Monika has mentioned, I'm Lucia Wu, and I'm the Environmental Renewable Manager here at Labella Associates. Labella is excited to share its deep bench of technical expertise to our communities in identifying and implementing a broad range of decarbonization solutions. As a full engineering firm with 13 offices from Buffalo to Brooklyn, we have dedicated teams focusing on renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable design, and climate resilience. With partners in both public and private sectors, we tackle everything such as solar, geothermal, EV charging stations, green infrastructure, ecological restoration, landfill methane gas reduction, as well as smart growth planning. We can also help navigate state and federal funding opportunities to help understand vulnerabilities specific to your communities, develop strategies, and execute your next decarbonization projects. We look forward to listening and learning from the discussion today. It's all hands on deck now in responding to climate change, and Labella has many hands to offer.
Thank you, Lucia. We really appreciate Labella's partnership. And special thanks to RG&E for being our event sponsor today. And I'd like to also acknowledge the event sponsors for the other lectures in the series: Hanlon Architects, the Community Preservation Corporation, Hevron and Company CPAs, and Bergman. Thank you all. We also appreciate in-kind support provided by WXXI, AIA Rochester, and Hedonist Artisan Chocolates. We truly appreciate all the support that we receive from the community. Thank you to everyone whose logo is on the screen. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to recognize everyone behind the scenes that have made this series possible, including our lecture committee, whose names you can see up on the screen, and Tricia and Kelly at Marshall Partners. Thank you all. Reminder to please take our survey at the end of the presentation. Your feedback is helpful in planning future programs. This presentation is pending AICP and AIA credits. Retroactive approval is likely, so if you're seeking continuing education credits, please click the link that I'll be posting in the chat to log your attendance today. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, Rebecca Evans. Rebecca Evans is the sustainability planner with the City of Ithaca, where her primary focus is to ensure that the Ithaca Green New Deal is implemented justly and in a way that doesn't cause excess burden to city residents. Her academic and research background is in environmental policy ethics, where she examines the impacts public policies have on different populations. Prior to working with the City of Ithaca, Rebecca was the sustainability coordinator for Ithaca College, where she worked closely with students, faculty, and staff to shape the climate action plan and engagement for the South Hill campus. Rebecca was also responsible for creating a 3-part webinar series examining the intersections of COVID-19, systemic racism, economic disruption, and the climate crisis that has been viewed by hundreds of practitioners all over the world. Prior to her work at Ithaca College, she worked to co-create a climate action plan for the city of Richmond and the surrounding county. She serves on the boards of various local and international nonprofits that focus on energy and equity, including the Cornell Cooperative Extension for Tompkins County, Building Bridges, 2030 District, and Environic Foundation International, among others. Rebecca is also a co-founder of the local chapter of the Sunrise Movement. Rebecca received her Bachelor's of Environmental Science from the University of Lynchburg and her Master's from Virginia Commonwealth University. I'd also like to take this time to thank Rebecca for stepping in semi-last minute for her colleague, Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres, who had planned to present today, but was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos at the same time. We cannot blame him for taking that opportunity, and we're so glad that Rebecca is here to give this similar presentation. All that said, please join me in welcoming Rebecca Evans as she takes us through a presentation called Electrifying Everything, the Path to Full City Decarbonization.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. As nice as it would be to be in Davos right now, I'm filling in for Luis. But I'll take you through a little bit of the story of the Green New Deal and my particular role in that, and where we are with the Green New Deal today. You know, we have a couple of flagship programs, some of which are in the news a lot more than others, but you know, electrification in particular is the one that people hear about a lot, but it's not the only program with the Green New Deal. So I'm hoping that that's what we can take away from today and some ideas of potentially how you can bring this home to your own municipalities. So I'm going to start going ahead and just going through these slides, and I have a lot to get through, so I apologize if I'm really kind of, rushing through this. I do want to get through everything. But like I said, I'm Rebecca Evans, Sustainability Planner for the City of Ithaca, where I really try and bring an equity lens to all of the work that we're doing. Luis has a very technical background. He is an energy engineer and has a special interest in financing. And we really do complement each other very well in the type of work that we do, so that we really are covering the entire spectrum of sustainability as we're starting to design, develop, and implement these programs. So we'll start a little bit just with, what the heck is the Green New Deal? That term is thrown around a lot. It's highly politicized, and it means different things to different people. So this is just our kind of standard blurb that we go through. It's a mission-oriented, coordinated, and collaborative approach to carbon neutrality by 2030, which is what the Green New Deal resolution committed to, community-wide carbon neutrality. It's a transformative effort capable of altering the economy, enabling a new social contract, and redefining relationship between government and society, as well as between the planet and the economy. It's also a people-first approach on long-term outcomes that elevate social capital, creating a new future, one where equity, justice, and sustainable prosperity are at the core of our transition and our transformation strategy. And we acknowledge that this requires the mobilization of public sector capabilities and the participation of all sectors of society for the transition to a new economic model. The Green New Deal, of course, is a globally driven imperative demanding the engagement of the community on a holistic approach to policy, investment, and stakeholder governance. So that's a lot of buzzwords that I just threw out at you, but really what we're trying to do is redefine relationships. And we're talking about relationships between government and the public and vice versa. So that means earning trust with the public to trust government to make decisions, but also the government needs to trust people to know what their communities need and respect those needs. We're also talking about relationships between people within the community and between people in the economy and the environment. And through those relationship changes, what we're really trying to do is change the trajectory of our climate and our planet over the next, potentially 50 years or more, although we are working on a very, very short timeline of 2030. So I'm going to run through again how we got to this point. I'm going to talk about the incredible team of young people that really catalyzed this process. And we're going to talk about how this is a lot more than just a climate change agenda like we typically hear, specifically for municipalities working towards carbon neutrality goals. This is really creating a community that we need in the wake of our current crises like systemic racism, public health, the economic downturn following COVID-19, and of course, the climate crisis. So the start of this thing was actually, it's really massive now, but it was really, really small when it started. I used to work with Ithaca College in their sustainability department, and I had a team of, anywhere between a dozen and 15 interns working for me at any given time. And as with a lot of upper class students, juniors and seniors, they really started grappling with how do we leave our legacy on this campus? How do we make a difference? There was a lot of frustration and anger around climate change, a lot of frustration with us, the administration, and as they would say, boomers that caused this problem. And they were really frustrated with how can they participate in this process and make a difference. So we sat down and we were talking about, what are our options, given that these are students and they're functioning kind of in this bubble on a college campus. How can we make the administration's job easier? How can we expedite a climate action plan without, gratefully, they were trying not to make my life a whole lot harder through that process. So we started talking and meeting at bars and at restaurants and in parks. And, we started thinking about how do we make the biggest impact? And particularly when we're in this bubble of higher education, institutions often think that higher ed, universities, colleges are the ones that are pushing municipalities in the right direction, that are driving innovation. So we started thinking, the college isn't moving fast enough, given the report from the latest IPCC report that's saying 2050 is far too late to actually start making transformative changes. So we thought, what if we actually flip that entire model on its head? What if we started to use the municipality as a driver for innovation and as a driver for universities to start making better informed decisions and expedite their their climate action plan. So these students, it was a group of 4 to start with, held an interest meeting at Ithaca College in this teeny tiny little room. We were expecting maybe 20, 30 people to show up, and it was standing room only. We had upwards of 100 students and faculty and staff that showed up, and they wrote letters to the mayor. And I think what's important about these letters is that it wasn't just science-based. It wasn't just facts about, the IPCC report says blank. It's, it wasn't just climate science. It was heartfelt, and it was emotional, and it conveyed the fear and the passion that a lot of these students were feeling that I think really resonates with city leadership. And if folks are thinking about how to do this in their own municipalities, that's where I encourage you to really tap into your personal climate story of, why do I care about this, and start conveying that to leaders, because that's really what is helping us move forward with this. So they wrote all of these letters. We got over 100 letters and ended up delivering them to the mayor in his mailbox. And it was kind of, for lack of a better word, we were expecting a crapshoot. We were expecting the mayor to maybe send us a nice email and say, hey, really lovely to receive these letters, looking forward to working together in the future, see you never. But to our surprise, that's not what happened at all. He emailed and said, would love to chat with you. And I actually got a behind the scenes perspective on this recently. A former colleague that used to work for the city had been pushing for more aggressive climate action at the city level for years, and just was not receiving the support that he had hoped for. And he said that the mayor called him into his office one day and just kind of sat him down and was like, what if we tried a Green New Deal, carbon neutrality by 2030? What do you think about that? And Nick, our colleague, is just slack-jawed in amazement, can't believe this is happening, is ecstatic that this is happening, and is totally on board. So we had a couple of closed door meetings with the mayor, and fast forward a couple of months, we have an educational sort of town hall at the local library, where again, we were not expecting a huge turnout, but we had the event space that could hold 200 plus people, and it was standing room only, overflow into the hallway. And it was a 2-hour meeting talking about, what does a federal Green New Deal look like, and getting perspectives from, community members that represented multiple different stakeholders. So we had energy engineers, we had individuals representing the indigenous populations, we had farmers. It was really a well-represented mix of Tompkins County and the city of Ithaca. And 10 minutes before the end, it's been 2 hours, we're really dragging by, and we see the mayor kind of dancing around outside, looking around, wondering, what the heck is he doing? And with 5 minutes to spare, he comes in all of his glory and says, oh, by the way, thanks so much for coming today. I am introducing a resolution to Common Council next week that is going to commit this city to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030, using a lens of equity and justice through the process. And of course, even when I think about it today, I still get goosebumps, because it was such an incredible moment to see representatives from really all corners of the city and of the county that were clapping and screaming and crying and so excited that this was happening. And in June 2019, it was introduced to Common Council, and it received unanimous support. So a couple of months passed, we're reaching budget season, and we're not seeing a whole lot of movement from the city. At this point, I still was not working for the city. I was still volunteering a lot of my time with the Sunrise Movement. And students, again, were really frustrated that the values of the Green New Deal were not well represented in the next fiscal year budget. So of course, these crazy climate kids are wondering, what do we do now? We're angry again. We have, a new fire in our souls to make something happen. And they did the next logical thing that they could think of, and that was run an insurgent campaign against the existing Common Council members. And just for a little bit of context, at this point, our Common Council members, most of them had been in their seats for a long time and were very, very comfortable. They knew each other, they knew this community, they were comfortable with getting reelected. And this really rattled Common Council to the point where we saw campaigns that we had not seen in years from some of these candidates, because they were nervous that these crazy students were starting to run for council and were getting a lot of support just based on the goal of climate action and equity. So unfortunately, none of our students were ultimately elected, but through this process, we actually did secure some additional contingency funding, which was granted towards the Green New Deal, and ultimately kickstarted this entire campaign. And then COVID hit, or it's about March, April 2020. They had been through the hiring process to hire a director, and everything stalled because of COVID. So hiring a director was put on pause, and there really wasn't a lot of movement on behalf of the city on reaching Green New Deal goals. So then once again, we're in this position to how do we keep this momentum going without, explicit support from the city, or without, dedicated city staff. So I volunteer as a board member for Building Bridges, which is an organization under the Dorothy Cotton Institute in Tompkins County that really tries to educate and build an economically diverse and just Tompkins County with an eye towards environmentalism as well. So the city actually ended up contacting us saying, there's a lot of work, we acknowledge there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And one of the things that we want to prioritize is community engagement, particularly of underrepresented populations. And frankly, we, the city, don't know how to do that effectively, but Building Bridges, we know that you have connections and do a lot of this outreach work, and are hoping that you can help us put together a program to reach these different populations. And that's exactly what we did. So we started organizing these grassroots visioning sessions that really targeted underserved populations in our community, which were primarily low income BIPOC individuals, that we trained on background of the Green New Deal, background on climate change and how it's specifically impacting Tompkins County, and compensated them for their time. And they had conversations with their own communities. So that was family members, friends, neighbors, people in their church groups, and they did this visioning exercise of these are the goals of the Green New Deal. What do you want to see from this? And particularly, what makes your life difficult living in Tompkins County, and how might the Green New Deal actually address that? And we had many iterations of this process over the past 2 years. We actually just wrapped up the last one this past winter, and have a report. And that report said some really interesting things, some of which were not surprising. Two biggest concerns, of course, housing and jobs. We knew that was coming. We know that that's an issue, and that is something that we try to address within the Green New Deal. But one of the really interesting themes that we saw come out of this was this element of distrust. And I mentioned this at the beginning, but this distrust of the general public towards government, that they're going to make the right decisions for the community, but also that the community was feeling a lot of distrust from government, that when they are representing themselves in public comment or in town halls, that what they say their communities need was not being respected by local government. And they wanted that to change. And that was kind of eroding trust between policymakers and the general public. So, we've been collating this information for a couple of years. And throughout this process, we're also trying to educate city staff, one about, what is carbon neutrality? We joke a lot that Common Council really didn't know what they were getting themselves into when they signed on to the Green New Deal. And it's funny because it's kind of true. There's a lot of work and a lot of money that's needed to make this happen. We estimate $2 billion to actually achieve the goals of the Green New Deal. And so there was a lot of education that was really needed, not just of elected representatives, but of city staff that would ultimately be implementing a number of these changes. So we did some of that staff education, and ultimately, that brought us to spring 2021, where something incredible happened. We hired this nutcase, Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres, who is a brilliant mad scientist genius that really understood the vision of the Green New Deal and what our community wanted to see. He had the experience to back it up. And he came in and hit the ground running. He and I connected very, very quickly while I was still working at Ithaca College, and we hit it off and immediately started working together kind of in my capacity as a community activist and with connections to the Sunrise Movement and to various activist organizations. So within a couple of months, really, Luis was able to develop this vision that drew on decades of experience and best practices from all over the world. And shortly after, he decided, we could really cause some trouble if we work together. And that's exactly what we did. So I joined, adding some fuel to this fire and being able to apply this really holistic equity lens to the type of work that we're expected to do. So we developed this plan for CO2 emissions reduction. And this is, really, really briefly, our plan for zero carbon emissions. The word carbon neutrality is thrown around a lot. We could take advantage of renewable energy credits, offsets, that sort of thing to sort of make our lives easier, our jobs easier. But we're not interested in that. We are interested in attaining the unattainable. And we will be the first to admit that we actually don't know if this is possible to do by 2030, but we are pouring our entire selves into this work and really drawing on the expertise of everyone in the community and outside our community to try and make this happen. So we've broken it down in this way based on different strategies for emissions reductions in particular. So energy efficiency, weatherizing the buildings that we actually do have in our building stock. We're estimating about 40% of our emissions are actually coming from our building stock. We're in the process of doing our greenhouse gas inventory where we'll have a more accurate number, but this is a reflection, across the state and across the country. So we feel pretty comfortable with that percentage. And that should take care of about 30% of our emissions. And then we need to cut that down a little bit more. And that's where electrification comes in. And I know that's what everyone's here to talk about. And I will talk about it, I promise, as I get a little bit further into this presentation. But we're talking about basically removing fossil fuel infrastructure from our city buildings and from our city fleet and from residential use as well. And commercial use. So removing natural gas infrastructure, that's the big one here, is heating and cooling in our spaces. So removing natural gas boilers, removing water heaters that use natural gas. We don't have a lot of fuel oil or propane here in the city of Ithaca. That is common in Tompkins County, but not so much in the city. So we needed to develop a program that addressed this, not just in new buildings, which is where a lot of cities have started and where we started as well, creating an energy code supplement to the state energy code that puts restrictions on fossil fuel infrastructure in new buildings. But we have very old building stock and we need to address that quickly. So we have buildings lined up already to participate in this program. I'll talk about transportation a little bit too, but we're releasing an RFP to start addressing at least our city fleet and behind the fence infrastructure as well as on-street infrastructure. And then we start talking about decarbonization, which is getting us, even closer to zero, where we start introducing distributed energy resources, new renewable energy projects, electrifying our fleet, including the really heavy duty trucks like fire engines and garbage trucks, recycling trucks, Department of Public Works vehicles, and looking into ways that we can combine that with carbon capture and sequestration and really innovative renewable energy. So hydrogen is something that we're really, really interested in. Biochar is something that we're really interested in with our wastewater treatment plant, which is shared with the surrounding municipalities. But all of this, again, just covers our carbon emissions reduction strategy. And all of this is done through this lens of climate justice and democratic engagement, workforce development, and resiliency. So we are not interested in only removing carbon emissions. We are interested in truly transforming the way that this city functions and the way that the public functions inside of it. We want to create new opportunities for people, as well as strengthen and empower existing opportunities. As we know, the economy is changing, and it's not just because of climate change, right? We've seen a whole lot of change in the wake of COVID-19. And as we begin to acknowledge the importance, for example, of indoor air pollution, we're seeing jobs change, job availability change. We're seeing our workforce change and workforce training change. And we need to adjust for that as well. So I'll show you just very quickly. This is our sort of scenario of decarbonization, with the baseline at the top being sort of business as usual, zero emissions reduction. Probably we could actually see that number go up, that if we continue with development without addressing carbon emissions, that we would see an increase in emissions. But, you know, compounding all of these things together can, in theory, get us to zero by 2030. So I mentioned that the Green New Deal is, electrification is the big one that everybody wants to talk about, but there are actually 12 programs under the Green New Deal, and electrification is just one. So if you look at that top line, these are the foundational programs of the Green New Deal, and underneath that line are the infrastructure changes. And the infrastructure stuff is really what we typically think about with sustainability. But the approach that we're taking is really that you cannot separate the two, and sustainability practitioners know that this is true, but it is so difficult to actually practice. So everything that we develop and that we implement needs to go through this lens of climate justice and democratic engagement, workforce development, and international cooperation. So we've developed a number of programs under this umbrella that address each of those things. So we have our climate action plan, which includes our greenhouse gas inventory, which is foundational in the sense that it gives us a better idea of what we're dealing with and creating a roadmap for a path forward. Climate justice, of course, I'm going to talk about this in depth in a little bit, but we have our flagship program called Justice 50. Democratic engagement is really critical to this, again, because that theme of distrust keeps coming up. And part of that means education too. So I'll talk a little bit about that program. Workforce development. This is actually something that we're working on in partnership with the City of Rochester. And I saw Brady Ferguson is here too, and want to acknowledge that he has been really instrumental to developing that program. International cooperation, that's at a high level, agreements with the United Nations that really pull together climate action plans with Cornell University, for example, Ithaca College, the county. And then we needed to really incorporate a level of transparency and accountability through this process. So we've partnered with Climate Reality Project, the chapter in the Finger Lakes, to develop a Green New Deal scorecard that is strict and critical of us, which is exactly what we wanted. We want someone to hold us accountable to the deadlines that we have promised, which are continuously changing. Luis and I are both new to local government, so we're really learning as we go. We're learning processes, and we're learning the right way that things are supposed to happen, and how to function within this local government. And then of course we have the infrastructure changes. So community choice aggregation is a big one. A lot of municipalities are looking at this across the country. Efficiency and electrification, electric vehicles and transportation, that includes micromobility strategies, distributed energy resources, waste management, which is one that's really, really tough for us because, like a lot of municipalities, our waste is not managed at the city level. It's actually managed at the county, and there's a lot of overlap. So that one has been challenging. And then of course, introducing low carbon fuels like solar, potentially wind, and one that we're really interested in is hydrogen. So this is kind of our rough implementation plan. Already we've blown past some of these deadlines. This is very much a work in progress. So I ask that you feel you are generous with the application of this timeline. In 2021, we started our democratic engagement program. That's what we call 1,000 conversations. That is exactly that, hosting 1,000 conversations about the future of Ithaca in a year. We started that late last summer, and it's kind of a two-way avenue of communication. So we do educational webinars similar to this that are really sort of human conversations that, yes, we are talking about really techie topics like hydrogen and community choice aggregation and solar. But what we really want to convey is that there are real humans behind this work, and there's a reason that these particular humans are doing this work, and trying to find that sort of common ground between, the people that we end up working with every day. So we have that going on as part of 1,000 conversations. We also have a power lunch, or we have the visioning exercises that we do that are personal conversations that individual residents have with their communities that ask them to envision 2035. We've achieved the goals of the Green New Deal and have really created this sort of utopia of the city of Ithaca. And what does that look like? What does that sound like? What does it smell like? You walk outside your door, who's around you? How is that different from what you see today? What resources are available to you? What did you used to worry about that you don't worry about anymore? And that program really serves two functions. One, we want to get people thinking out of the box. There's this really great Steve Jobs analogy that says, if Steve Jobs were to have asked individual people what they wanted to see out of a new phone, they would have said, I want to see a longer cord on my house phone. Never in a million years would an individual person say, I want to see a freaking computer in my pocket that I can get on the internet at any time of day. And that's what we're really grappling with, is people to really harness that innovation, that creativity, and that imagination to think of what's really possible, and not within the context of what we have today, but what we have the potential to create. So we're opening up that door of creativity so that people aren't as nervous or afraid of change that may be coming. And also we're collecting all of this information. People are submitting videos of these conversations so that we can actually comb through and do a deep data dive to start developing programs based on what our community wants to see. So that's 1,000 conversations. We're also working on CCA, which would secure sort of bulk buying power of renewable electricity for our community. We're also interested in matching that with 24/7 CFE, which is carbon-free energy, that would essentially develop a time stamping mechanism to ensure that every single kilowatt hour of energy that we are using is matched with renewable energy production. And I know I'm flying through this. I apologize. I just don't want to get too tied up with this. And then Justice 50, which is what I will talk about a little bit more in depth. That's our flagship justice program that essentially says that we are going to ensure that 50% of the benefits of the Green New Deal are directed to disadvantaged or climate justice communities. And I'll go into a little bit more about what that means. And then, of course, the big one that everyone's heard about is our electrification program. We have about 6,000 buildings in the city of Ithaca, and are attempting to electrify every single one. That includes commercial buildings, municipal buildings, single family homes, multifamily homes, and it really runs the full gamut. We're trying to get all of them off natural gas. The way that the program is structured right now is that it is entirely voluntary. We have a number of pilot projects within that program, one of which is a really, really exciting affordable housing pilot, where we have partnered with a local not-for-profit that builds and maintains affordable housing buildings in the city of Ithaca, and we are looking to see how can we incorporate every sustainable technology that we have access to, and how do we make the financing work for affordable housing. So that's something that has already started, and we're in the process of designing an implementation with our technology partners this summer. And then, of course, we have the zero waste and electric vehicles and all of the other sort of typical sustainability stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about electrification. So it has a very unsexy and uncreative name: energy efficiency retrofit and thermal load electrification. I told Luis this is a terrible name and we need to change it, and we're working on it. But as we were designing this program, there were a number of criteria that we wanted to make sure were addressed. One was increasing economic sophistication. So as programs like this typically function, we're relying really, really heavily on state incentives, state grants. And as I'm sure a number of sustainability practitioners on this call can attest to, funding is limited and we can only make so much headway in so much time. I mean, we can probably count on staff hands how many homes we have fully electrified over the past 10 years. And given our 2030 deadline, that's just it's not fast enough. So how do we bring in private money to actually accelerate this, give us some more foundation for this program, and ensure that people that traditionally are not able to take advantage of these technologies are able to benefit from them? We also needed to address industry fragmentation, and you can look at that a number of ways. We can think about, the siloed nature of sustainability work. We have a number of organizations that are working in the same space, sometimes on really, really similar, if not identical projects that are just not communicating. So we needed to address that. If we're going to make this happen by 2030, then we really need to open up the lines of communication. This also means addressing fragmentation in the sense of workforce development. We're going to be creating upwards of 600 jobs with the electrification program. How do we ensure that we have the workforce to actually do this work? And of course, especially in light of COVID-19, we're seeing supply chain issues. So how do we address those issues to ensure that we can meet our deadlines? Of course, creating economies of scale to achieve equipment and labor savings. We'll be the first, again, to admit that the city of Ithaca is not even a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the ocean. We are not interested in a carbon neutral Ithaca. We are interested in a carbon neutral New York and a carbon neutral world. So if what we are doing is not scalable and is not replicable by other municipalities, then we have no business looking into it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is create this blueprint for other municipalities all across the country and across the world to do the same thing. So to date, we have talked to over 250 different municipalities that have asked, how are we doing this? What the heck are we doing? Why are we doing this? Can we partner? And we have had some really amazing collaborative programs come out of those conversations that we're really, really proud of. Of course, achieving bulk purchasing power, as I mentioned, supply chain issues are very apparent, especially in light of COVID-19. So how can we, for example, partner with other municipalities to achieve bulk purchasing power for air source heat pumps, for example? Developing a skilled workforce, I mentioned this already. Maximizing efficiency and allocation of state and federal incentives. This is critical. We cannot do it without money from the state and the feds. And of course, mitigating risk through local and state-driven measures. So, establishing state-level loan loss reserves for our financial partners and ensuring that residents can take advantage of state and federal incentives. And I bolded this one and made it in a different color purposely. We need to achieve financial inclusion and climate justice. We often think about sustainability as being something that is only accessible to wealthy white people. And unfortunately, those are not the same people that are on the front lines of climate change. And that includes in the city of Ithaca. We may not have devastating wildfires or horrifically rising sea levels, but we still see the effects of climate change and of the changing economy because of climate change. And through all this, we need to create a transparent and efficient operating structure. So that means ways that people can interact with us, can provide us with ideas and feedback. So that's that may be a community advisory board, which we are just kicking off. And also making sure that the way that we are developing these programs is transparent as well. But I want to rewind just a little bit to the climate justice aspect. The state is already working on this, like I'm sure a lot of you know, developing a criteria for the CLCPA to define what disadvantaged communities, that's their language, who they are in New York State. And that is to fulfill goals outlined by the CLCPA. The federal government is also looking at something like this through their Justice 40 program. So we have taken Justice 40, we've upped the ante a little bit, one, because we're crazy and we have all the time in the world apparently, but also because we really wanted to ensure that we are not, for example, working on an upper income household for electrification if we are not already working on a lower moderate income household. We really value that split, that it needs to be balanced. So we developed Justice 50, which again is our commitment to 50% of the benefits benefiting what we are referring to as climate justice communities in the city of Ithaca. And our first step to doing that was to define our climate justice community definition. So the first thing that, in order to do that, we need to take guidance from the state and from the federal level. There are other states that have looked at this, like California, Massachusetts. And what we were finding is that really those definitions do not translate to the city. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is data availability. So most of these definitions are relying on census tract data, and particularly given the dubiousness of the 2020 census and the number of populations that were left out, we did not feel comfortable relying on census tract data. And this was further complicated by the long history of gentrification in the city of Ithaca. So we are not like Oakland or like New York City, where we're seeing, neighborhoods that share similar demographics and culture. We are seeing geographically dispersed populations where historically Black neighborhoods, for example, are no longer predominantly Black. They are being gentrified, being forced out of the city in some cases, or forced out of to different parts of the city. So what we needed to do was really turn that model on its head again. That's a theme in the work that we do, where instead of identifying communities, we're actually identifying households. And then those households can make up communities. So we are first identifying individuals that can benefit from these programs. So that passed our Common Council unanimously just last month. So we have an official definition of climate justice communities, which not only mirrors the state's criteria, but then takes it a couple of steps further to include some of the populations that are not included in that criteria, like undocumented immigrants or people experiencing homelessness. So next, we really have to figure out, what is Justice 50? And we've met with a lot of experts in this, including the Luskin Center at UCLA, who developed guidelines for the Federal Justice 40 program. And what we're hearing is that identifying trickle-down benefits is not enough. So, air quality is not enough. Access to transportation is not enough. What we need to be doing is establishing a floor for monetary investments in these programs. And we're in the process of figuring out what that floor really is. And, given our political moment right now, what's possible to actually pass. So right now we're toying with somewhere between 60 and 70% of total investment in the Green New Deal. And that's not just municipal investment, that's partner investment too, needs to be dedicated to climate justice communities. So from there, we'll start developing guidelines for existing programs. So that is, this is a whole of government operation. This is not just Green New Deal. This includes planning. This includes economic development, public works. It really is a whole of government effort to address some of the inequities that are present in the city of Ithaca. So we need to develop guidelines for existing municipal operations and then for our proposed Green New Deal programs as well. And tying into, climate justice, of course, is jobs. That was one of the big things that we heard from our community. That was a really big concern, especially in the wake of COVID-19, after, thousands of people are getting laid off from their jobs. How do we not only create new jobs, but ensure that people that are chronically underemployed have access to these jobs and access to this training? So what we did was develop a proposal for what we're calling the Green Jobs Corridor, which is a partnership between municipalities, not-for-profit organizations, sustainability professionals, contractors, childcare providers, transportation providers that are dedicated to creating this workforce ecosystem that really not only provides opportunities, but addresses the most common hurdles to underemployment in this region. So this is between the city of Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, Elmira, and Ithaca, with Ithaca really driving this since our electrification program is already off the ground and we have the jobs that need to be filled. And acknowledging that there are, different landscapes for work in these different cities. So we don't have a lot of industry in the city of Ithaca or manufacturing, where we do see that in other cities like Rochester or Syracuse. And that is definitely something that we need to address, again, through supply chain of air source heat pumps, for example. So what this really attempts to do is provide the wraparound infrastructure that typically is a hurdle for underemployed individuals. So that means providing childcare. That means providing stipends for people participating in these workforce training programs. It means providing transportation so that somebody living in the city of Rochester, for example, can continue living with their family in the city of Rochester, but can get transportation to the city of Ithaca during the week, during the working hours, so that they can still support their families and don't have to uproot their entire lives. So we know that, 6,000 buildings is a finite number. And once we reach those 6,000 buildings, whenever that may be, we will get there. Those jobs aren't going to exist anymore. So we need to have the infrastructure in place so that people aren't just out of work and back to square one. So this entire program not only provides that wraparound infrastructure, it also provides the job training that not only prepares people to enter into the workforce in blue collar jobs, but actually prepares them for entrepreneurship, to own their own business, and to really become part of this movement. So a big part of this curriculum is actually activism. This is the Roots of Success program. This has been implemented in a number of cities. New York State is, I believe, is also considering this at the state level. And it provides access to, pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, micro-credentialing, certification programs that really equips people to enter this workforce as, not just, someone that's entering this as a space filler until their next job, but for a lifetime of employment. So this was a proposal that we submitted through the Good Jobs Challenge and the EDA. We expect to hear back about this, probably not for another few months, but we have gotten amazing support from our partners, not only the partners that are part of the Green Jobs Corridor, but from the state and the federal government as well, the Department of Energy. And so we expect that even if we don't get this funding from the EDA, that we will move forward with the Green Jobs Corridor regardless. And I'm nearing the end, I promise. These are just a quick sort of snapshot of what we're expecting in the next year or so. Greenhouse gas inventory for community-wide operations. We're expecting this by the end of the summer. Our climate justice operational guidelines, we're hoping to get through Common Council by July, which would really start to shape the implementation of all of those programs under the Green New Deal umbrella. We're looking at a micro-mobility strategy. So how do we get people out of single passenger vehicles and onto bikes, on their feet, onto scooters? And how do we actually make a model so that this is actually not only beneficial to people in terms of health and mitigating carbon emissions, but how do we create a business model that it really works for the city? Like I said, we're working on this affordable housing electrification pilot program. We're looking into hydrogen, 24/7 CFE strategy. And by the end of the year, we're really hoping to have a local law for CCA implementation and data protection plan that would be an opt-out model, so that individual homeowners will actually have to opt out of this program instead of opt-in, which if anyone has either signed up for CCA or has tried to get individuals to sign up for CCA, it's often a door-to-door process, and it really is a hurdle to getting people to participate. So we're going after this opt-out model. We're hoping to develop an electrification fund that would otherwise help low and moderate income households or climate justice communities receive the benefits of the electrification program without financial restraints getting in the way. And then, at the end of the year, we're hoping to really have a robust report on how the first 6 months or so of the electrification program really played out. We're absolutely not expecting this to be perfect. We're expecting this to be a learning process for the city and for all of our partners. So we're hoping to release something like that at the end of the year that, of course, we would share with other municipalities so that they can learn from our progress and from potentially our mistakes as well. So really quickly, I want to wrap this up as one of the key takeaways that I have learned through this process of really having no idea what the Green New Deal would actually look like and just having it as a pipe dream was the importance of humanizing this work and building and maintaining relationships. And I know this sounds really cheesy and squishy, but it really is critical. So we are the first to admit that we are not the experts on everything. Luis is an expert in some things. I'm an expert in other areas. And there are still gaps between us where we need to outsource that expertise. And that's what makes, bandwidth issues, especially that we see in the sustainability work, that's where we're able to fill the gaps. So we're able to outsource some of that work, give it to the experts like CCA. We have contracted with Paul Fenn, who is a renowned expert across the country in CCA development. So we're working with people like him on different projects and respecting that expertise. And then of course, we need to respect that not all expertise is professional expertise. Some of this is lived experience. And this is where that cycle of trust comes in, where we need to trust that the community is telling us what they need, and we need to respect those needs and incorporate them into the design and implementation of all of these programs. And oftentimes, even when we think that we're experts on something, there's an element that we just cannot connect to. Luis and I are both transplants here. We're new to local government. We're still learning as we go, but we cannot bring that lived experience lens to the work that we're doing. So we learn a lot from our community partners and from individual residents that tell us, I tried to do XYZ in the past, and these are the hurdles that I came across. And that's something that without those conversations, we would really never know. So I just wanted to stress the importance of building new relationships, maintaining those relationships, and again, respecting the lived experience. And I've got my contact information here. That's all I have for now in terms of slides, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Bill Price. Thank you very much for the presentation, and amazed by the amount of work that you guys have been able to pull together.
Thank you.
In a fairly short period of time. There are some questions that are popping up in the Q&A, which I'll get to. I'd like to just, if I could, start off with a couple of questions about your experience and transitioning from Ithaca College and a not-for-profit situation to one where you're working at the city. What do you see as kind of the best organizational structure to achieve what you're trying to do with the Green New Deal? And let me just give you an example. You started out, I think you called it the Sunshine
Sunrise Movement.
Sunrise, which was not an arm of a political municipality or political entity. So this was a group of like-minded citizens, doing their best to engage the elected officials in trying to achieve some higher level sustainability. But now that you're at the city, how do you see the relationship working between not-for-profit organizations interested in sustainability and climate change and the municipality?
Sure, it's a tough balance, but I really value the relationships that I have with some of these not-for-profit organizations. I'm still on the board of a number of them, but it's a really tough balance, and it's really an exercise in humility, because they are the first ones to tell me that I am screwing this up or that I am doing something wrong, and so I need to kind of take a step back and really appreciate what they're saying. But I think that especially these not-for-profit organizations and youth in particular are our best measure of accountability. They are the first ones to tell us we're not moving fast enough, or we're forgetting some element of this program. So I think, in terms of accountability, that is the easiest thing to take advantage of. We went through the hurdles of developing this entire scorecard through Climate Reality Project, but again, that was the product of a number of conversations with some of these different community members and community organizations. You're muted.
Let me start off with a question from Elizabeth. Are you working with area farmers to build soil health, which adds carbon to the soil, or with the city on soil health for all city lands?
Sure. So we don't have many farms. We have some, small urban farms. I would consider my backyard an urban farm in the city of Ithaca, but we're not really working at the scale I think probably that this question is addressing. We are looking to biochar, which could be, which is a process at the wastewater treatment plant, and organics that would take organic material and process it into something that is usable by farmers. But it's one of the hardest things about this work is, the geographic boundary of the city, that we really only have control over what happens within city bounds. And, especially in the city of Ithaca, like Rochester, we have a lot of people that are commuting to the city, that are spending their tax dollars in the city of Ithaca, but that don't live within that geographic boundary. So the short answer is no, we're not working directly with local farmers. And the primary reason for that is because we don't have many local farms within city bounds.
There is an anonymous attendee that has a question. Are there any negative health effects or impacts with electrification?
On the contrary, electrification actually addresses a number of negative health impacts. So, combusting fossil fuels on site in your home releases a ton of indoor air pollution that is really, really toxic to cardiac and respiratory health. Particularly if you're cooking with a natural gas stove, the likelihood of your exposure is, like 6 times that if you were to be using an induction stove or an electric stove, for example. What this individual may be getting at is, the grid's capacity for electrification, which, in all honesty, if we surpass that capacity, then the entire city will catch on fire. And that is agreeably a negative health impact. So we're working directly with the state utility to, one, make infrastructure investments so that we don't surpass that threshold and that we are actually increasing the capacity of our local grid. Meanwhile, also introducing renewable energy projects in the city that can supplement that demand.
I have a question. I'm sure it was shown on some of your graphics in the diagrams, but could you just speak quickly to how the Green New Deal aligns with the city's comprehensive plan? And do you see recommendations out of the comprehensive plan that you are now addressing through this Green New Deal? And speak a little bit to fossil fuels and the dispensing of fossil fuels, if you could.
Sure. So the comprehensive plan does make an explicit commitment to sustainable development. And I believe that our energy code supplement directly addressed some of those commitments. And then there are the sort of softer elements within the comprehensive plan that are addressed within the Green New Deal, like affordable housing, workforce development, creation of jobs, economic development. So, yes and no, but as far as I know, the comprehensive plan did not address the Green New Deal, explicitly, but, a commitment to sustainability and to emissions mitigation and, essentially just creating a more accessible city of Ithaca.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question from Brad Van Auken. Expound on hydrogen energy. How would you implement this? Where would this be used? I'm also interested in distributed microgrids. What are you doing in this regard, and how are you approaching this?
Sure. So this is Luis's baby. He is the hydrogen nut. So I apologize that I won't be able to speak to it as in depth as Luis would, but we are exploring possibilities for hydrogen in order to create microgrids in the city of Ithaca. So it's not an abandoned property, but it's a very, very large property that we've targeted for the potential of hydrogen development. That's on the west side of the lake. That we would like to take advantage of. We are in conversations with the developer that owns that property and believe that it is a really good candidate in terms of real estate and space. But nothing is set in stone yet. So stay tuned, I think is the short answer. But yes, we are interested in developing microgrids, one in the interest of resiliency, And two, we mentioned, the capacity of the grid. So we need to be able to supplement that in some way. And luckily, we've been really, really lucky to be working with the state to find some ways around this in the interim. But ultimately, yes, we do want to develop microgrids. Likely, I think we've been talking about, in the range of 3 for the entire city. The city is very small. I think it's like 6 point something square miles. And some of that is lake where, no one's living in the lake as far as I know. So it may actually be closer to like 5 square miles.
So a question that seems to confront communities across the state and probably across the country is when the sustainability measures that you're talking about, from appliances to your cars to the way we handle our waste streams and things, it does appear that there are costs associated with this that exceed the costs that people are used to when we have appliances that run on natural gas. And as we move into electrification, are you seeing that the increased cost is in some ways a contradiction or contradicting the intended goals of workforce development and housing, providing affordable housing to people? And are you seeing this, and how can we address the perception of increasing costs to achieve sustainability while a desire to provide affordable housing and good job treatment?
Sure. This is a totally fair question. And I readily admit that the reality is not everybody is going to save money through electrification. In fact, most people are not. City of Ithaca primarily uses natural gas for heating. So we don't see a lot of fuel oil or propane, which is where we would typically see the most energy savings. One thing that we do take into account through our Justice 50 program is the energy cost burden. So, what percentage of your income is actually spent. So if that qualifies you under that climate justice criteria, then you're able to tap into some additional resources. But the way that we're really framing this, and this has been really intentional, is not necessarily around sustainability, right? Sustainability is in itself a polarizing word. So we are framing electrification as movement towards, better public health and comfort. So, shout out to everyone else that is inside in upstate New York today and it's 80 degrees and doesn't have air conditioning. I'm in the same boat. And that is a huge selling point right now, especially as we're seeing summers that start in, beginning of May and drag on through September. So trying to phrase this as an indoor public health issue and as increased levels of comfort has gotten us relatively far. There's a percentage of people that we will never be able to sell this to. And that's where we need to kind of bring in the stick and the carrot scenario into play, but we're not quite there yet, but we anticipate something coming down from the state as well that would otherwise mandate this conversion. So, we have support at the higher level, even if we can't find support at the municipal level.
Rebecca, this is a question from Brady Ferguson, and it follows a little bit on the tails of your last responses. How have you engaged with community members who distrust government or oppose the Green New Deal for other reasons?
This is a really, really tough one. So thanks for that question. The short answer is that we do our best. A lot of this is about creating relationships. So, in my short bio, we mentioned this this webinar series that we did that was really about creating relationships so that we can further share sustainability goals. And one of the themes from that is that we're starting to move away from transactional relationships to transformative relationships. So what we don't want to do is say, hey, we came up with this excellent idea, would love your feedback, and we'll put it in a drawer somewhere and never look at it. What we want is to start having conversations during the design phase so that we're really bringing the community along throughout the entire process rather than directly asking for feedback. So that means establishing relationships with leaders in these communities. So we have partnerships with community leaders of color, with immigrant rights organizations, with historically Black community centers. And that brings me to my second point, that one of the other strategies that we're using is actually a place-based strategy. So instead of going and trying to find individuals, we actually go to community gathering places to try and meet people where they are. So where people are dropping their kids off every day, where people are going to church services every week, going to, community centers, schools, whatever it is, trying to meet people where they are and just having a really frank conversation and bringing a level of humility that is sometimes really, really difficult. And I have found that the tougher the conversation and the more uncomfortable I am in that conversation, the more I'm actually taking into my work afterwards. So encourage you to get uncomfortable and try new strategies. There are a ton of best practices out there in terms of what works with community engagement. And I'll say that not all of them translate to every single community. We found that place-based works pretty well for us, and connecting with community leaders, but that may not work everywhere.
Thank you. Glenn Cersoletti is a longtime friend and participant with the Community Design Center. Glenn has a question. Can you please speak more to the role of the college and university in developing and implementing Ithaca's plan? Are they helping to drive the effort forward? Or as large institutions with their own infrastructure, do they present unique challenges for achieving the city's goals?
I think the answer is both. Certainly Ithaca College students were instrumental in actually catalyzing this process and getting the Ithaca Green New Deal resolution passed initially. Cornell University is an amazing partner. It's a research university, so they're able to provide us with data that otherwise we do not have the capacity to collect on our own. Their circular economy lab has been really, really, really helpful. We have interns from both universities, but with that said, they do present their own unique challenges because part of those universities do function within city limits, and the colleges and universities have their own climate action agendas or carbon neutrality dates. So one of the ways that we addressed that was by roping in the colleges to the UN Energy Compact so that we have some at least shared agreements and then at least an understanding of where we differ and how we can work together. So, I think that, again, the short answer is both. Instrumental in the development and the implementation, absolutely critical in research, but also presenting some unique challenges.
We have an anonymous attendee with a question. Do you find that there are issues with the zoning or coding that present challenges for the efforts you're trying to make?
Sure. I'm not sure that I've seen zoning necessarily be a challenge, but in terms of like safety codes, we anticipate there being a huge bottleneck when the electrification program really starts to ramp up, especially for these deep retrofits where a building permit is required, and we just don't have the city staff to provide those permits on the timeline that we would prefer. So that's something that we are addressing internally with the city, but we have not yet figured out the best solution. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, especially around building permits.
One of our great sponsors, Simeon Bannister, has a question. Can you offer more detail about the partners with whom you have worked? We know about Block Power, for example, has worked with you on electrification. What was the experience with them? What process do you use to select potential partners?
Sure. So Block Power is actually the program manager for the electrification program. So that is actually a coalition of partners with Block Power managing the partnership. We also are partnering with Aguirre-Torres, which is, briefly the commercial building equivalent to block power. So block power is bringing in half of the funding, Alturas is bringing in the other half of the funding. They are also partnering with local engineering firms, community outreach organizations, education organizations, as well as the city to implement this program. I lost the question. Where'd it go? Here we go. What is our experience? Yeah, what has been our experience? So we're actually just really getting started. Our official launch date for the electrification program is tentatively June 1. So all of that, news came out in the Washington Post and the Guardian, but we don't yet have a contract signed. It's a really tedious process to get to that point, but we're expecting that to be signed on June 1st. That being said, we have been working in terms of, building selection data and developing outreach methods, making sure all of our community partners on board. And I have been very, very impressed with Block Power, not just with, the work that they do, but with their commitment to doing this in the right way. They are just as committed to equity and justice as we are. And I think that has been extremely valuable as we begin to pave the path forward for the electrification program. And as far as how we actually select them, we are required, like most municipalities, to release an RFP. Block Power and that coalition responded to that RFP in addition to some other coalitions, and we graded those proposals on a rubric, and Block Power was the winner.
Another longtime friend of the Design Center, Clement Chung, has a question. Can you describe how the City of Ithaca is working with Finger Lakes reuse and how solid waste diversion or extended producer responsibility is an important component of climate action?
Sure, and this is something that we're just getting started with, the extended producer responsibility aspect. I mean, we're still trying to work out, what exactly does that look like, especially on a small scale like the city. But we do work with Finger Lakes Reuse, and not just even on waste. They are a really instrumental partner in workforce development. But one of the things that we are anticipating them, again, being very instrumental with is how we're dealing with waste from the electrification program. So, we're going to be tearing out, in some cases, some still very usable equipment out of people's homes. And how do we best deal with that in a way that doesn't, counteract everything that we're actually trying to achieve? And I anticipate Finger Lakes Reuse being really, really critical to that process. We hope to recycle all of these things. We hope to use them in innovative and unique ways, whether that's for education or what have you. But in terms of the extended producer responsibility, like I said, that conversation is just getting started, and that's really not within my purview with the work that I do with the Green New Deal. But I would certainly be willing to follow up with more information.
Thank you. I have a question for you. A lot of communities do, when they prepare comp plans or they update their comp plans, like to now really engage. Some of these are 15, 20 years old, and now sustainability and climate change has really been brought to the forefront in the last decade or so, and the kind of the extreme urgency of it. And in these master plan documents, a lot of communities like to say that they're on the forefront of sustainability. I'd just like your thoughts on what being on the forefront of sustainability means. The example, I sometimes hear that, that the policy or that the way that goals and objectives or principles are written need to be crafted that they are very much on the forefront, even ahead of state agencies or other agencies involved in climate change. But is it more important to strongly word your policy, or is it more important to get down to the grassroots like Ithaca is doing and get it down to the point of actually getting people to buy electric cars, getting people to disconnect from natural gas, actually doing the things that are going to ultimately change the course of climate change?
I think it's both. I don't think you can do one without the other. And I think we're getting into this territory of philosophical conversation that I really, really love, but I'm not gonna bore you with. But there's the question of, do individual choices matter? I think is really at the crux of the issue. And I think the short answer is yes, if they are coupled with wider policy decisions and grassroots communication. So to me, being at the forefront of sustainability means being willing to take risks and be innovative. We're really hopeful that this electrification program is going to be successful, but we can't guarantee it. And that is a risk. And Black Power and Alturas are taking big risks to, funnel a bunch of money into this teeny tiny little city in the hopes that this is the start of something absolutely huge. So that's what I see as being at the forefront, is really risk taking, which is not something that I think local government is very good at, including ours. But that's where innovation starts, right? Is at the cities, and then it blossoms out into states and regions and in the country, I hope.
Are you finding that there are different levels of willingness and to engage in this, both from a philosophical standpoint, but also in an implementation standpoint? And are you seeing that residential users, multifamily projects, academic institutions are willing to participate in this? And where is industry? Where is your large commercial? And where are some of your large property owners? I know the city doesn't have a lot of farming or large open space within the city boundaries itself. But who walks into a Wegmans Food Markets and says, okay, we want you to disconnect from natural gas? And do you see that conversation actually happening? Or do they say, well, yeah, if you want that, you're going to lose 300 to 400 jobs, and we're going to move out to the immediate adjacent suburb? Just generally, what are you seeing from the different segments of the market?
Yeah, I think it's still too early to tell. Certainly we have the easy wins with people that are already knocking on our doors and saying, we are just, on the edge of our seats waiting to take advantage of this program. And then we have the people that we're never going to convince that this is a good idea. And that's where the stick comes in, right? And then we have everybody in the middle. And I think it is going to take a lot of education, and that's where we really rely on our community partners. But yeah, I'm not sure yet. I think we can tie a lot of this into, especially with corporations with ESG goals. We can try and rope in our goals with those and sell this as an investment in environmental and social governance. But I'll let you know, at the end of the year what we find out.
That would be interesting to hear how some of the different sectors of your economy are responding to this. Tom Morgan has a question. I'm not going to ask the entire question, but I think you can get at the gist of his question in a couple of sentences here. I keep hearing about air-sourced heat pumps, which are good. I've been all electric with AS, I guess it's air-sourced heat pumps since 1991, but geothermal provides at least double the energy efficiency. So that's his question, but this is I think a common theme in the discussion of climate mitigation and electrification is, do we have the appliances and the technology that are not going to significantly change our lives in the comforts and the quality of our life that we have today? And that's heating, cooling, cooking, driving a vehicle. Your thoughts on that?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question, and I'm hearing, why not geothermal? Is that
I think
the crux here?
he's, I think Tom is, don't want to speak for him, but I think there is some concern that we do hear a lot about heat pumps and
Mhm.
getting ourselves off the traditional furnaces and air conditioning, but that there are technologies out there, including geothermal, that may be more efficient, more reliable long-term than heat pumps. And I think there's to me, it sounds like there's a whole education process on what these technologies are. The traditional homeowner may care about it, and like Tom, have a heat pump for 20, 25 years, but someone may not even start thinking about this until their current, heater or air conditioner, furnace or air conditioner goes. And are we in a position to educate them on electric alternatives to the traditional natural gas fired stuff?
Sure. And ultimately, this is a decision that's going to be made by the homeowners. We can't force their arm one way or another, but geothermal is certainly on the list of possibilities, and district geothermal is something that we're really interested in piloting, especially for multifamily units, which we have a low income multifamily housing that's several stories high, that we're really interested in testing district geothermal in. But at the end of the day, a lot of the restrictions again are on financing, on financials that are available to individual homeowners. It is more expensive up front, which, even if that does, even if that is counteracted over the life of that equipment, it's hard to see beyond that for a lot of people. So yeah, we're trying to make sure that all of the options are available, and are trying to provide as much information and education as we possibly can to individual homeowners or commercial building owners, and tenants too, and are relying really on our education partners to do a lot of that work. And then, for example, Block Power or Alturas coming in and explaining the financial aspect of it. But yeah, geothermal is certainly not out of the question.
Rebecca, we've pretty much come to the end. I do need to turn this over to Monika to wrap things up. But on behalf of the board of directors, everybody at the Design Center, very interesting, very engaging. Really, really appreciate your time and all the efforts that you're going to help develop a blueprint that hopefully we can all take advantage of.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, so again, thank you to Bill and to Rebecca for that conversation. I hope that you will join us again next week for a follow-up community conversation that will feature representatives from Labella, the Climate Solutions Accelerator, and RG&E. So that is 1 week from today, June 1st at noon on Zoom. And I also hope that you will join us again in June for the final lecture of the Ideal City Reshaping Rochester series. That lecture will feature Anna Music, and she'll be speaking about the public realm. Excitingly, this event will be in person at the Memorial Art Gallery. First in-person event in you know how long, over 2 years. So we ask that you stay tuned for tickets for that event, which will be released very soon. And really appreciate your patience as we transition back to in-person events and iron out all those nitty-gritty details. And do note that the event is a little sooner than usual, our usual schedule. It's 3 weeks from today. And a final reminder to please respond to our survey. Your opinion counts. It will pop up right on your screen, so you won't have to do much to answer it. And with that, we're officially at the end of our program today. I thank you all again for joining us. A recording of this event and a copy of the chat will be distributed to all of you by the end of the week. Rebecca Evans, thank you for a great presentation and for all of your expertise. Bill, thank you. And to everyone else, take care and be well.